Welcome, everybody. Mike is back from Seattle, so we wanted to do a pop up podcast and talk about that experience. First off, what was Seattle and how did you get invited?
So Seattle was hosting basically in a nutshell, it's the Gun Violence Prevention Research Conference, right? I think they've changed the name a little bit, so it's not so much like gun violence or whatever. There's little blind spots that they know they have and stuff like that. But that's what it was. It was a bunch of researchers, surgeons, people that work in behavioral health coming together. And this conference is growing every year. They had 800 people attendees this time, which I guess is like double what they had last year. So I always see these conferences growing. But I was there to co-present, which was pretty much historic in my opinion, because it was the first time that someone from the firearms industry was presenting at this conference. So that's pretty special to me on a panel, and also to present for WTTA on conducting research in partnership with the firearms owning community. So obviously the very first part of my presentation is basically talking about Walk the Talk America. Many of you listening, Kevin, something that you guys could have done. You've heard me talk about it in the echo chamber. You could follow along with the slides and everything like that. But remember, this is a room full of researchers and people from universities and things like that have never heard about it before. So I was afforded that opportunity to talk about our solutions coming from the gun industry. But really what was interesting about it, the presentation or the most important thing was the question and answer session. Being that I was presenting on the first day at 10 o'clock in the morning, the rest of my time there was very much like when I went to the Aspen Institute of Health. The rest of my time there was actually attending all these little breakout sessions that are going on during the day. And the way the day is scheduled is starting as early as like 8 something in the morning, all the way up to almost 6 o'clock. There are I should call them little breakout conference room sessions that some of the rooms hold hundreds of people. Some of the rooms may only hold 80, right? Going on. We had 80 people in our presentation, which was really good, because even before I went on, Megan Rainey, who is kind of like the moderator, the person that was running our session, said, "Hey, I don't know, because there's so many events going on at the same time, I don't know how many people are going to be there." So she warned us. She's like, there could be 5. We had 80, which was awesome. And the Q&A session, in my opinion, after all the other ones that I had attended, the Q&A session was the most packed in terms of literally there was a line of people that didn't get to ask a question, that either had to wait till we were all walking out into the hallway because it was bleeding into the next session, or just ended up having to leave and catch up with us later, or catch up with somebody on the panel later. So I would say that the presentation in itself was a massive success from what maybe the expectation or the worry was. So that's and how I got there was basically because of Megan Rainey. That's the person that got me to the Aspen Institute of Health. And like I said, I'm very proud that they like what we do. They trust me to go up there and pass along information in a kind manner, and not just go up there and piss people off. Although some people don't care about that stuff, but that's not my style. So that's what that was.
What were some of the questions that you got after your presentation?
I got everything from, things about ERPOs to how do you connect to gun owners? Like, researchers just want to help. And I think that's true. There are a lot of, today we're going to talk about the good and the bad, right? The good, the positive outweighed the negative, I think, in a lot of cases, right? But there are a lot of researchers that look at this as just data. Doesn't mean they have an opinion one way or another, but a lot of them definitely feel like they do not connect to firearms owners. So there's a lot of questions about trust and building trust. There's a lot of opinion questions on laws. Also, I got questions about what are some of the alternatives? What would you suggest, or where do you think efforts need to be put when it comes to research, right? And that's when I was able to say things like, I would love to see research on how many people don't get help because of ERPOs, or I'd like to see this type of research that could help us have a better understanding of this, right? Like, those are the things that are making them see where I think they're lacking, as opposed to like doing the same research over and over and over again. nothing ever happens with that. And I think, the default for gun industry folks and the 2A community is that all of this stuff is negative. It's going to be used against us in a negative way. That's why I think we get frustrated with a lot of the research that's out there. But for me, like I said, this is a time when we can literally, now that we have our own solutions, we can put them forward, and people, respond well to that. I think that they always have, as opposed to being like, here's this data set. Those numbers aren't good. We're not proud of those numbers, but we don't know what to do about it. You got to do something. Now it's like, yeah, see what you found there? This is exactly why you need Walk the Talk America. This is exactly why you need the suicide prevention program from NSSF or child safety, like any of the other programs that are out there. But yeah. So, that I was getting all kinds of questions, and I was also getting a lot of compliments too. I want people to understand that, like, there are people that flat out just got up there and just were like, I love your work. And at one point I actually kind of got embarrassed because it seemed like most of the Q&A was directed towards me. You know what I mean? There was like a time when somebody asked a question and they were looking right at me, and I was kind of waiting for the other people on the panel to answer, and I'm just like, me again? Like, you know what I mean? Like, we got to spread this around. The panel was made up of a few people that were very pro-gun too. I just want to make that clear. Megan did a great job of having a nice balancing act. There are people from 4-H there. We had a retired police chief that retired from that life and went into research. So I think it was a well balanced group of people up there. Which is cool.
What was your role in the presentation? Because I know you and I were working on doing the slides, and it was almost like we had to coexist with the other presenters. So what were you responsible kind of for presenting on, and how did that relate to what they were touching on?
I think my role there was to, like I said, I really think that the most important part, and I got confirmation from Bill Broussard. Bill Broussard from NSSF was there. Rob Pincus was in the crowd. David Yamani was in the crowd. Kenny Barlow from Regal, right? They make the locks for most gun companies, and Child Safe was there. So there were some friendly faces in the crowd and Bill had told me, he's like, where you really got a chance to shine was in the Q&A, like the things that you were saying and addressing those questions. But my role there was really to show how the gun industry and the mental health community can work together. I think I was more of the hope role, right? Like, and also the innovative solution. That's one of the things is my recommendation to the crowd was, be open-minded to the different solutions that are out there for, this data use. Like, we don't have to get stuck in the same rut and try to use these numbers for the same things, for legislation that prevents gun owners from exercising their rights. There are ways that we can look at this. And I was able to bring up things like, hey, I think, not all legislation when it comes to gun ownership is bad, right? Like, we've talked about that before. There are things that I think we could legislate, like getting a tax break from insurance companies for providing suicide prevention materials in gun shops, right? Where you reward people for wanting to be involved in the conversation. Like, those are things that people in that group had never really thought about. No one's really presented them. I mean, not all. Some people have like out of the box ideas, and I talked to a few people that kind of work in policy that were there that had talked about like their state. One girl from Tennessee in particular that I remember had talked about they were kicking around the idea of having a bill similar to the one in Louisiana that TAPS got passed, but it failed. They voted against it in the end, where it was like removing the liability from gun shops if you give your guns back too soon. And I asked her, well, why did it fail? And she was like, we didn't go about it properly. We didn't have the right people there. She's like, someone like you there, who could go testify as to why this is. And then I thought about when Gala said that they had all the gun shop owners testifying there. She's like, we didn't have any of that, so it failed. So I don't think people understood what was going on. I see that G Webs is asking, is this a new conference or something that's been happening? This was year 3. I think this was year 3 where they took it serious. The first one I think was in Chicago. The second one was in DC. This one's in Seattle, but this is growing super fast. And one of the one of the cool things about this is it's going to be in Phoenix next year. And one of the great things about this is that we were not shunned at all. You know, it was funny because we were like Cobra Kai in terms of like a little clicky, right? Like familiar faces all walk together. So at any given time, you would see me and Pincus and Yamani and Brassard, everybody just walking together, and we'd sit together and eat and lunch. So like we had our own clique, right? Where some people were just like, oh, the gun people, you know what I mean? But having said that, you know, we were treated with mad respect, you know, like you know, even when people disagreed with me, and we can dive into this deeper, but even when people disagreed with me, I felt like they were genuinely interested in what I was saying, and nothing ever really got heated or anything like that. You know, a couple instances here and there where someone you could tell couldn't get over their bias for firearms, or they had been hurt somehow with their family member, someone doing something tragic to a family member, and that was getting in the way. You know, I think, you know, overall, super positive response. So much that like we made some recommendations, and they really took them to heart. You know, one of them was, you know, next year we want a table there. You know, they had all these tables in this like one lobby area. A lot of these schools, like schools of medicine and stuff like that, were displaying what they do there at these tables. And we were like, hey, would you guys mind if, say, like an organization from the gun industry were to sponsor something and also have a table? And they were like, no, we would love that, which is pretty damn cool, right? Because you know, I'm not sure you'd see it the other way in the gun industry, but who knows, right? Like maybe NSSF would let somebody like a Pfizer do something. I don't know, but like, you know, they were really open to it. And I thought that was a good idea too, because instead of having people just track us down as we're walking, that happened a lot, right? I'm walking around, and keep in mind, this is on 4 floors. And then there's a basement area on the other side of the hotel where all these conferences are going on at the same time. It was at the Westin in downtown Seattle. So if anyone's ever been there, they know how big that place is. And, you know, so many people were like, I'd be on the escalator going down, and this person's like, I want to talk to you. I want to talk to you, you know, like, you know, then you have these, you know, these quick discussions, but you got to get to where you're supposed to be, or the next session that you want to get into. You know, I think having a table there where we can just alternate and man it is the best way. So maybe people during the breaks can come catch us.
Yeah, this kind of leads into G-Web's question of like, how do we prepare to make Phoenix 2025 kind of more successful and break into the medical industry more? And that's probably part of it. You and I were talking on the phone this morning, and we saw John Hopkins' team posted, and they had 20 individuals there representing them. And that table, I think you said, was 12,000 to get a table at that event. So a lot of resources to make something successful like that.
Yeah, it was funny because at one point, I think Pincus and Megan Rainey were talking, and Megan is like the mayor there. You know what I mean? Like you can't walk 5 feet without someone jumping in her face and talking to her. Like it's kind of like, you know, like Coley Noir walking through a SHOT Show. You know, you're just not going to get to where you want to be anytime soon because everyone's going to stop them. But at one point, you know, they were like, would Walk Talk America sponsor it? And I was like, well, how much is a table? And I'm naive. So I'm like, what is it, a couple thousand? They're like 12K. I'm like, what? It's like, I said to Megan, I said, no, I can't do that. Like that would kill us. You know what I mean? Like we're so lean and mean. Actually, like she was just like, that's a problem, Mike. You know? And I was like, yeah. She's like, that's a shame. And I was like, absolutely. You know what I mean? Yeah, but G-Webs, you would be shocked at how hard it is to get money for this stuff. You really would, right? Like I remember getting into this industry and or you know, this part of this industry, thinking I could get every manufacturer to donate 2K a year and we'd be perfectly funded. I couldn't have been more off. And Kevin knows exactly what I'm talking about. So it's just like you think of something like 12K, but yes, you're right. 12K is not a lot of money to actually have a presence there. It's just WTTA can't do it. Some of these bigger companies could do it easily, no problem. You know what I mean? And I think that's something that Rob Pincus is gonna. That's a challenge to him now, right? Because he wants a table bad, right? And you know, I think we need to have a presence there. But first of all, let me just tell you, as a regular person off the street who's a 2A supporter, you know, I think that anyone can attend this event if you just pay. I mean, it's $600 to attend the event. They feed you. I mean, obviously they don't take care of your hotel and your your airfare. And obviously, I'm talking from the standpoint of you're not a speaker; you're just attending the event to learn and take in the information. It's $600, and you basically get 3 days of a conference where they feed you snacks, water, all that stuff is there. They have a cocktail hour and stuff like that, things like that. So anybody from the firearms industry could just go. But here's the thing: we're invited. Like, we just got to come up with the cash to get the tables. And then the way I saw it is, I'm looking at NSSF, and it might be a little difficult for them in terms of, like, I don't know. I feel like they kind of just attend and obviously observe. But like Walk the Talk America could partner with, say, maybe like Gun Alert, right? Or Regal. And we could share some of that cost of a table, because you can have Walk the Talk America information there. And you could also have the latest technology that the gun industry is coming up with to prevent negative outcomes of firearms, right? By the way, me just saying that statement, that was one of the questions I had. Instead of saying gun violence, how would you phrase it? Right? Like that, it just popped in my head. Like when you're like, what were some of the questions in the Q&A? And I said, I'd prefer people to say negative outcomes of firearms. Right. And then I got to say why, lumping gun violence together, and I was able to say, like, first of all, I don't even believe gun violence should be the term, because there's no such thing as hammer violence or screwdriver violence, or car violence. But, let's just go there for a second. Being able to say negative outcomes of firearms is just a little softer, because people don't think of suicide as violence, even though one could make an argument, like Jake says, it's violence to self, but it's just a little disingenuous, right? And they all have different solutions. So I was able to say that aloud, and I had a bunch of 80 heads pretty much nodding yes. But back on track, talking about having our president. G. Webs makes a great point, right? Like, gun owners are going to be able to change this debate by showing up and being there, especially when a group of people are so willing to listen. Now, they're researchers, right? So they are going to push back on things or say why they did things. But getting our input is so valuable to a lot of them, because believe it or not, a lot of them are like, hey, we just want to help. And we're just looking at numbers, and we know we have blind spots. And I mean, I had a few researchers, like different researchers, like confirm that you can take statistics from a grouping and cherry pick what you want. And they were like giving examples of cases where people made full blown presentations, and the guy in the next room did the same presentation using the same numbers and had a completely different outcome. You know what I mean? Like, and their minds were blown. Like, how did you come to that conclusion? So, I love a lot of the honesty of these people. I thought that was really cool. This group, and keep in mind, we're saying researchers. There's all sorts of people there, in academics and things like that. And they're humans, right? Like, we're all humans. Humans have bias. Humans make mistakes. Humans don't think things through all the time. But being there, being present, being respected, exchanging numbers with people that are like, look, we're diving more into this work, and I want to pick your brain about a lot of stuff. I want to be able to run things by you. I respect that. But then again, I give everybody the out too, right? Like, you don't have to agree with everything I say, and I'm not always right. But if I can get you to pause and reframe the way you may think of something, or let you see that you do have a little bit of a blind spot here and needs to be discussed, then I'm going to do it. That's the way it is. That's the way I'm not going to get frustrated. I'm not going to go into these things and with a closed mind. And until someone treats me with disrespect, I'm going to stay respectful.
If you had, let's say, a $50,000 check and said your goal for this money is to be successful in 2025 in Phoenix, what would that entail? As we see, all right, 12,000 gets you a table, but that doesn't get you people to man the table while maybe you're speaking or learning about what's out there. But how would you allocate that money? Who would you bring with you, and how would you make that successful?
Well, so that's, for me, the way I was looking at it is, if I can do a shared table, we could rotate, right? That's what I was thinking. Regal, someone like Kenny Barlow can work it. Now, keep in mind, when people are in the breakout sessions, you really don't need to man your table. I noticed when people were in the breakout sessions that lobby was empty. So it's not like SHOT Show where there's the convention going on and there's like places to go and little things that you can duck into. It's pretty much like everyone scatters, finds out what room they want to be in to what they want to hear. And then they come back to the tables at the break sessions. They have these like 25-minute breaks throughout the day sporadically. And then they have a lunch break where there's a big ballroom and everyone's eating lunch that they provide for you. But there's still people in the lobby area all co-mingling and discussing, right? So I don't think that's an issue because it's the way it's set up to where it's like having to man it. I mean, I want as many gun people there as possible because here is one of the issues that I saw with the event. There's a lot of good speaking sessions going on, and a lot of them are going on at the same time. So it's really frustrating, right? Because sometimes you want to go to more than one, and it's at the same time. So you got to choose, like, am I going to duck out of this one to go to another one? I remember sitting there with like Rob Pincus, and I was like, which one do you want to go to? And he's like, I don't think we should go to the same ones. We should be always not together. And I'm like, yeah, but that sucks because then we can't like bounce things out. He's like, I know, but at least like if I know I got you into ERPO one and I'm going to go over here to this one about ghost guns or something like that. You know what I mean? Like, so it made sense what the strategy was to spread it out and really try to find the ones that really made sense. Like Kenny Barlow from Regal, anytime they talked about storage and stuff like that made sense for him to show up to those ones, right? Because that's direct with his business. But for me, there's so many of them that make sense, whether it's homicide with the youth or safe storage or policy. Walk Talk America kind of like has all those things kind of covered, right? So I want to hear what people are saying and what the data is saying, or what the thought process was. That's the only thing I got frustrated by is knowing I missed some ones that I really wanted to hear what was going on, at the time. And people could say, oh, well, maybe you could watch it later, right? Well, that doesn't help me with the Q&A. Like the Q&A is where a lot of the good stuff happens. So G Webb's asked, is there law enforcement presence? I mean, there were people that worked in law enforcement there. Like I said, on my panel, there was a guy that was a police chief of his town, right? I didn't really think there was like a law enforcement presence in terms of attendance, like from people. The majority were researchers. I met a lot of surgeons. I met a lot of people that worked in that field, but a lot of it was just research and I didn't see too much law enforcement. Now, that's not to say that there wasn't some speakers that weren't law enforcement that people brought in for their panels, or because every single breakout session, it wasn't just one speaker. It was always like four. It was always a team of people tackling a subject or tackling research, which goes to show you, like, technically every one of the people that was on my panel could have had their own 45-minute session, but it is what it is. I get it.
What were maybe the positive interactions that you received outside of the Q&A and your thing? I know you've said you ran into a few people that had some kind words. How did those interactions go?
All those interactions are the best, and that's when you hit it, right? Because I think about there was like 80 people in the room. Granted, like Rob and Bill and Kenny and David Yamani were in there, right? So those are gun people. Like we can't count those people saying "Good job, Mike." Like it was more like Mike, don't screw it up, right? But for me, when you get in an elevator and three people get in and they're talking amongst themselves, and one of them looks behind and notices it's me and hits the person next to her and says, "Hey, good job in there. You did great." Right? Like that was awesome. That was a really cool presentation. And they're saying this in front of other people. And I'm like sitting there like, I really appreciate you. Thank you. I'm glad you liked it. Right? Like those are measures of success to me. And I had about 15 of those where people like literally as I'm walking by either did the whole like stop, ask me a question, tell me they really, really enjoyed what the information that I gave them. And they're more curious. Here's my number. I want to exchange ideas, all this stuff. Or just hey man, you killed it. Good job. Like, I really appreciate what you did. Like that's a good measurement of success to me. I didn't have anyone say that I was full of shit. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Or I had an agenda, so that was really good. Being the first person to speak at this event from our industry, I wanted to nail it. I wanted to make the people laugh. I wanted to make the people feel comfortable, and I wanted them to learn. And I felt like I accomplished those three things. Kind of putting a human face to the industry that's different from, because it's really easy for them to, and we can talk about that too later. I want to talk about like the keynote speakers and stuff like that, because one of the keynotes was a guy from every town, and it's really easy to get them to snap back into that whole like anger activism. We got to do something, which shouldn't. That's what research shouldn't be about. You know what I mean? You got to take your bias out. So I've seen it when they rally around like talking points in a crowd, and it's just natural for them to be like, "Yeah," you know what I mean. And we do it too in the firearms industry. We fall into the same traps when we're around the echo chamber, and people just can shout out these talking points, and we all just like, "Yeah," and it's like, nah. Um, but I was good, in terms of like, I think the reception. I had like one negative incident, and it really wasn't much. It was just, I could tell this person was affected by gun violence in some way in her life, or she was knee deep in it, and it was getting in the way of her listening to what I was saying. You know, I took it until I didn't have to. I was like, I gotta bounce, I gotta go, and I let Pincus handle it because he'll fight for hours.
It sounded like alcohol was also a contributing factor to that one negative experience as well.
Yeah, I mean, anytime you're in a bar and alcohol and there's like emotional discussions going on or heated discussions, it's always dangerous when it's strangers. But we also had some people, some researchers that we were drinking with that are like, you gun people are really, really fun. Because we were like, if people invited us to something, we are like, yeah, like, or they're like, hey, you want a drink? We're like, yeah, or you want a shot? Yeah, all right, we'll do a shot with you. You know what I mean? Like, people just like a shot show, they let loose at night. So it was really cool. That part was cool. What were we
All
gonna
right,
use?
let's shift a little of what were maybe some disappointments about it. There were a lot to be excited about, a lot to maybe plan for next year's event to make a bigger impact. But what were some disappointing themes or elements that were present?
Well, I already said that there's too much going on at once. That's a disappointment because there's a lot of information that I wasn't able to get access to because of all the things that were going on, that I would have loved to have seen some people's opinions, because, there were researchers there that literally backed up Walk the Talk America's work, right? Like there was one guy who had these like boards, and we're going to have Kenny Barlow on in the next week or so, and we're going to have Rob Pincus on. I think it's important that they come on too. I want the listening audience to hear a couple different perspectives, right? Because sometimes I think I'm naive. I'm like, everybody loves us, and they might feel different. You know what I mean? Like, so, uh, obviously being disappointed about how it's structured. I think there's better ways that they can stagger these things, so maybe you can get to one or the other. One thing I was disappointed in is some of the same talking points that they use over and over again in their data. Like, I'll give you an example. I went to like 3 different presentations, and they said gun violence is the leading cause of death in youth, age 1 to 19. And that's just an eye roll for me because I know what they're doing, right? And once I had healthy debates with people on that, because like some people saw my face and they're like, that bothers you? Like, why does that bother you? And I got to explain why. Some took the information well, others disagreed. I told you all about it. But so seeing some of these numbers and seeing how flawed the numbers are or how they got them, that's disappointing at times, because I'm just like, and I'll give you another example. I was in one about ERPOs, right? And really listening to the way that they love ERPOs or they think they save lives. And then, you know, this one lady goes and she's like, yeah, the myth of the scorned woman is just a myth, so I don't really want to hear about, people lying and weaponizing these laws. And I immediately like turned to Bill Broussard, and I'm like, apparently this lady's never met my ex-wife, who to this day admits that she lied. She lied to hurt me in court, and says in front of my friends, in front of my current wife, yeah, I listened to the wrong people. I listened to my lawyer and everybody giving me advice. I wish I wouldn't have. Right. So it's like, I get that, you know, we need to listen to people who may be victims and stuff like that, you know, but there are people that will lie to hurt. So take the word scorned woman out of it and just put scorned human. Like, people will hurt somebody that they feel wronged by, especially when it comes to love, emotional things, relationships, right? I've seen it on both sides. So to say that that's a myth and apply it to ERPOs is dangerous, super dangerous. And I didn't get an opportunity to do it because there wasn't enough time at the end and the Q&A line was so long, but I wanted to be like, have you not watched the ID Network? Have you not seen all the women that kill their dude because they're angry? They're clearly scorned people, have to be discussed when talking about ERPOs. You know, I don't care what conclusion you get to in terms of like what we do with them, but to act like they don't exist and then make that argument because you're a researcher and you're up there presenting data, like that didn't make any sense to me. So like that was very frustrating. Things like that, right? And keep in mind, Pincus is going to have a million of these. Pincus's show is going to be amazing. By the way, for the listening audience, there was nothing better than having Rob, whether you love Rob or hate Rob, right? Because he knows he's polarizing. There was nothing better than having Rob Pincus dropped in the middle of this thing, because it was literally like a tiger running around a room full of deer. If you didn't have your shit down, if you didn't know what you were saying, or he was going to catch it. And at the end of day 2, the joke was Rob Pincus speaks at every session, is a presenter at every session. Where? In the Q&A. 90 minutes out, about every 90 minutes, Rob Pincus is speaking, because there wasn't one where he wasn't at the microphone first to say like, hey, your data, what you just said there. You know, a couple, I'm going to let him tell these stories because they're his stories, but like one that he did was really funny, that basically the research that they presented said like in 18 years, only 100, they could only account for 100 deaths from ghost guns, right? But in their research, they demonstrated how much money and effort has been put to the whole anti-ghost gun campaign, right? So Rob jumps up and the first thing that he says is, I'm glad the room recognizes that an insanely disproportionate amount of money has been put to something that really isn't a major factor when it comes to saving lives, when it comes to firearms. And what was the audience going to say? Because he just he screwed up the whole narrative by taking the data that they said, and really pointing out something that, hey, you guys have really missed the boat on suicide prevention. Because that was another thing that frustrated me about this conference. The suicide prevention piece, I felt like they were ignoring suicide. There was a lot of talk about homicide, not who's killing who, but who's dying too. I feel like they skipped over that part, which was very frustrating. I sat in ones where they tied homicide in Black neighborhoods to systemic racism. And it's like, okay, as someone who's open-minded, maybe I can get there if you build the case that over the years, the social economic situation has created this environment, but not all marginalized groups kill each other at that rate. So to leave that part out really frustrated me, because I'm like, they're not saying who's doing the killing. They're just saying that what's causing it is this, and I'm not sure that's the case. I want to help people. I want to get to the root cause. I want to know, it doesn't matter what color you are. If it's happening, we need to talk about why it's happening. We need to say who it's coming from and really address it that way. I feel like we do a disservice when we kind of skip over that part because we're trying not to offend or insult or anything like that. And I don't think research should be like that. I think the numbers are the numbers. You know, they didn't talk a lot about suicide like I thought they would. I thought I'd be seeing a lot of different breakout sessions where it was suicide, and it really wasn't. I feel like it was like skipped over a lot, that is the majority of gun deaths. I had one person say, well, it's only 58%. And I was like, did you just hear what you said? I was like, it's over half of gun deaths. But, people are going to people.
Yeah. Yeah, it was interesting the slide because we had to get pretty much the presentation. I don't know if approved is the right word, but we got some gentle pushing feedback to change the kids to King slide, and we had to go back and forth on that slide, what, 2, 3 times before they were satisfied with what numbers we were reporting. That was definitely frustrated from my point of view when we were reporting numbers that are on the CDC website.
Yeah. I mean, and at that point, it didn't matter. So the conversation that we were having about that when we were trying to adjust these slides to make it so everybody was happy was just that. I was like, it really doesn't matter to me because I'm here to talk about the program. And I got a lot of compliments on the Kids of Kings program. There was a policymaker from Tennessee that I had mentioned earlier that really had a vested interest in that program, saying like, I'd love to take it back to Tennessee because, they're looking for solutions. She was flat out honest. She's like, look, I work for Republicans, and she's like, we're always looking for ways to combat this without, we feel like we're attacked because we don't want to conform just to whatever they say is the solution, because obviously those solutions aren't working. So she's like, you're the first person that I've seen that's had these really out of the box ideas that I think everyone can agree upon, right? And I'm like, well, absolutely. Because she's like, do you get a lot of pushback from the anti-gun crowd? I'm like, no, no, not at all. I'm just like, what are you going to do? Because if you push back on me, it's going to be tough if you say like, this is worthless, don't do it, or no, this is not a good idea, especially when you're talking about Kids of Kings. I got to use my phrase in the room. I love dropping that bomb in the room, that gun responsibility and gun safety are not just for little white hunters in Wisconsin. No disrespect to the little white hunters in Wisconsin, but it's not just yours. It's everybody's. And most people were nodding yes. Like, I agree, So making them see that blind spot was a cool part of the Q&A. There's there's a guy that I worked with at the White House in 19 that I saw there. His name was Matt Miller. And I was sitting there with Bill, and I was like, that guy's pretty anti-gun. I've bumped heads with him. Now, keep in mind, no disrespect to Matt Miller out of Massachusetts. Matt and I have sat there and had conversations off gun topics, and we're totally cool. But I know Matt, how he feels about guns. And he feels like the only way to stop any negative outcome of gun violence is to prevent people from having them, right? That's a cartoon world for us. But I pointed that out to like Bill and Kenny. And sure enough, later on, he had a presentation, and, I'm going to have Kenny on to talk about it, but he said some stuff that really kind of triggered Kenny, So it's like, not everyone's going to make everybody happy, right? But that's the whole point, and I tried to say, Kenny, obviously, if you prevented people from drinking alcohol, you will drastically cut down on, drunk driving. Like, Captain Obvious doesn't need to be in a room to talk about like things that make sense in terms of like how it is, right? If you don't leave a stove on, the kid's not going to burn their hands, right? It's going to drop if you take all stoves out of houses. That's not a practical solution to anything. And especially when it comes to a right. Like, that was the other thing that I had to keep bringing up to these people. I'm like, a firearm is the only object in the Constitution, and you can't overlook that part. Like, change the Constitution, get it changed if you have a problem with it. But as of right now, for our sake of argument, you can't use that. Well, that's not what it was meant to be, or that's not it. I had a lot of those like conversations. They weren't necessarily arguments, but I had to remind them that there's no other object in the Constitution. And that's why we end up where we end up, right? That's why most people end up with Second Amendment, probably from a cold dead hands, right? So you just try to keep people back on track. Like, listen, that's probably not going to happen. So how do we do the root cause mitigation? How do we figure out the why? But that's how research is. I don't think they ever are there to figure it all out. I think that's how they get money. That was another hot topic that we got to address. If I had a dollar for every time someone said, well, being prevented from doing research on firearms for all these years. And I'm like, that's not, no. And they're like, well, yeah, the government didn't allow us to do it. And I was like, yeah, federal money. And they're like, well, where else are you supposed to get money? I'm like, I don't get money from the government. I survive. I'm like, figure it out. There's plenty of people, private funders, that probably would love to have done research, but they're acting like it's the end all be all. Pincus is going to talk about this too, because that Matt Miller guy, I think they got into it at his presentation because Matt was like, do you have $10 million for this research? And of course, Pincus is like, what about this research costs $10 million? Like, that's a bigger problem right there. Like, I want to know how much does $10 million get me? But like, once again, that's a Pincus story to tell. Like, I'm going to let him break that down. But, they all act like if they don't get the money from the federal government, then it's research. And then here's probably Kevin laughing inside, because we all know that the CDC numbers aren't good enough for some of these people. So they cherry pick when they want to use a CDC number.
Yeah, I would have given it to him if we cited our own survey of whatever it was, 360 people, and they're like, yeah, that's not really that factual because of A, B, and C. No, it was the CDC numbers. Yeah, it draws importance to they want this amount of funding to go to this cause. And I mean, we did a decent survey for free. Granted, we all wanted to do a better job with it, but it shouldn't take that amount of money to research gun violence, and the only people with the amount of money get to drive what gets researched.
Yeah. It was really interesting because I asked one guy the question of, because I would bring up our research, I'd bring up our survey, and I would tell them, hey, look, it's not like your guys is, I haven't gone through those hoops to get it like whatever, okayed by X and Y, whatever. And I said, but I don't understand how standing outside of a gun shop and offering somebody a $25 gift card and collecting that data is different than what Walk Talk America did. Like, we targeted gun owners basically through guns.com. Anybody that promoted, you got the Clover tax, right? And the ghosts out there were saying, hey, take this survey. Walk Talk America needs your help. Speaking to gun owners directly, right? And I was just like, I don't understand why it's so different that you gave a $25 gift card and stood out front of a gun shop when we just kind of like went. Now, granted, I get it. All walks of life probably come out of that gun shop, right? Like, not everybody's the same, and our audience is very similar in our thought process. And obviously, we got there where people said like 85% of people don't agree with red flag laws, right? But the guy like literally moved on to the next subject. He didn't want to he was just like, he wasn't disrespectful or anything. He's like, yeah, I don't know. I see something in the chat talking about disproportionate talk about mass shootings. I didn't see that. There was a couple presentations that I sat in, and there were some eye roll moments where they kind of just talked about mass shootings in the context of like the angry white male, who's disenchanted, or, and they brought up examples of like people in these organizations like Antifa, everything from Antifa to like, the Boogaloo Boys, like the Boogaloo guys, like that was, so you saw it a little bit. Then again, that was the problem with this conference. There was a lot going on. He might be right. Like, there might have been some disproportionate talk about it, but it's just not in the ones I saw. So that's a great question when we have Kenny on, and then we also have Rob, because we all went to different ones. We tried to. There's only a few where we both went to them, but I didn't see that. But then I was very strategic about what I was choosing to attend. So
With the last 10 minutes, if you could wave your magic wand, where do you hope that the healthcare industry improves and maybe reaches out for opportunity? Because I know when you went to Utah, it was like 6 months later, and somebody from that was like, hey, I saw you speak at this event and this led to this opportunity. What opportunities or mindset changes do you hope the healthcare community makes, and how do gun owners maybe change in a year to take advantage and be better prepared for Phoenix?
So I want to say that I don't think I need a magic wand. I think it's happening. I think this was a good showing for us. I think the right people were there, and we could argue who could do what better, but to me, like, us going there and being able to engage like that and being accepted was a step in the right direction. I think we have to want to be there, though. They want us there, but we have to want to be there as well. I want to see if they follow through and it wasn't just lip service on letting us have things like the table, or we had recommended giving us like a keynote spot. And keep in mind, like, Gala True from the Armory Project, who is a friend of ours and we worked together. She had her own presentation. She had her own session with the people from TAPS that were talking about the success of safe storage and the programs that they developed in Louisiana. So, it wasn't like it was all slanted to one side. And of course, there were researchers that were gun owners that came up to us and said, "Hey, I'm a gun owner. I grew up shooting." There was a lot of talk about rural stuff, like gun behavior in rural areas and the way culture is. So you did have that aspect to it. But I just think, like, for us, we got to have a bigger presence there, whether we're just going as individuals who are coughing up to $600 to learn and sit in the sessions and be in the Q&As and making the introductions. We got to do it. We can't sit here and say it's all a bunch of garbage. I don't want to listen to it just because it's something you don't want to hear or something that's going to piss you off. Like, they're never going to change, or they're never going to open their minds if we don't do it. And I feel like we get it on a lot of, it's not even worth the time. I think this is a lot of this group. They are thoughtful. They are inclusive. And that's in all walks of life. You know what I mean? Like, they do not want to offend. There were many times where people apologized to us after, like, a keynote speaker said something. One of the, real quick, since we're up against time, let me tell you about this one keynote speaker. She basically, in her speech, because it was about, she owns an organization that analyzes the trauma that Black families go through, African Americans go through when there's a gun death, right? Which is odd to me, because I felt like, doesn't every race go through that? Like, gun death is tragic, but I get it. Okay. Like, disproportionate amount of homicides come from that community. So it affects the community probably a lot harder than to say, like, a rural, rural Seattle. But, I was making the point of that. And one of the researchers was like, "Well, what would you like to see it up against?" And I was like, "Well, just, all right, take, for example, families who lost someone to a drunk driver. Because to me, that's the same. A stray bullet and a drunk driver, right? Like, that's ripping somebody's family away from them too soon, unexpectedly, whatever." But at one point, the lady said, "Your research is your activism." And I was like, "What?" And I, like, look around, and of course, like, Rob's just like, everybody's like, "No, like, absolutely not. Your research should not be activism driven. You could use activism after you do unbiased research to find out something that is true or not. I have no problem with someone making that argument. But if you go into research thinking of, this is my activism, then you've already poisoned the well." And that made me uncomfortable, because people cheered for that. Now, there were some researchers I talked to, and I said, "That to me is bullshit." And they're like, "That was absolute bullshit." Right? So once again, we can't just blanket statement this group, right? We can't, that's not fair. But, seeing something like that, if I had a magic wand, I'd be like, "No more of that." You know what I mean? You want to bring people together. You got to understand the room is bigger than you. It's bigger than you think. Then they had the keynote said that Wilcox from Everytown, who's on the the Biden task force for gun violence prevention. Having that guy talk and getting that crowd fired up, knowing that he damn well has an agenda, which is an anti-gun one, that's frustrating. Hearing people, one of the breakout sessions, and you got to excuse me, I've been burning at both ends for the last 3 days. So sometimes this stuff is going to come back to me later, and I'm going to be like, I wish I would have said that. But that's why we're going to do 3 shows of this. We're going to have my show, Kenny's show, and then Rob's show. But, like, one of the ladies was like, "We need more ERPOs. Like, we need to expand it to who can enact them to be able to curb gun violence." And I'm like, That's not a good look either. Like, that's like saying we have a quota, start pulling people over for like minor traffic offenses to give them tickets. Like, no, we don't need more ERPOs. We need less ERPOs. We need to get to the root cause of this. We need to catch people early. But here she is advocating for more people like clinicians and things like that to be able to enact an ERPO so we can stay on top of this. And it's like, that to me is flawed thinking, because you've already made up your mind. You want less people with guns out there. That's it. I got to make those points, people. I got to make that one. I saw somebody else. I want to hear more about the Q&A. One person asked me, what do you recommend besides ERPOs? I got to tell them my thought process on alternatives to ERPOs, but I also got to tell them how dangerous I thought ERPOs was. I also got to tell them that you don't really give a shit when it comes, because the only thing you take when you take somebody's gun away is the gun. That's it. You don't take anything else. And I was like, I do not believe that if someone is not fit to have their firearm, they should not have their car either, or their knife set. So I was like, we have a bigger issue. You're telling me that there's a human missile out there who's unstable, who might do something to somebody or somebody else, and the only thing you could think of is take away their gun? That's it? Nothing else. No path to get help. No, nothing. And I think that really resonated with a lot of researchers. Because I was like, that person should not be walking around if they can't have their gun. They just shouldn't. That means there's a bigger problem. Waiting periods. I got into some healthy debates about waiting periods, right? At least people got to see what I thought about them. And anecdotally, I was like, we could play anecdotal tennis all day long. Like, you give me an example of somebody who took their life that probably could have benefited from a waiting period, and I'll give you somebody that lost their life because of a waiting period. Like, we can do it all day. You know what I mean? But in the end, I don't think the overall making everybody wait for a small sect, especially when they cherry pick data whenever they feel like it, like, the 1 to 19 thing, being youth and children and not having any, not being responsible enough. But you can shoot a porno, at 18. You could buy a rifle at 18. You could be sent over, seas for the military to kill human beings at 18. And you can also vote for a president at 18. I mean, all these things, if you're telling me that we're going to lump 19-year-old kids in there because at 19 you can join a gang, well, what is this about then? Is it really about protecting youth? Because it doesn't seem like you're protecting the youth on those other subjects. Let it go. You know what I mean? But hey, if I'm not there, I can't bring these points up. I can't make these arguments, and I can't spark the brain. And I'll admit, they're smarter than I am. Maybe not emotionally, maybe not street smart, but my ASU degree is not going up against Yale, Harvard, Stanford, all the John Hopkins. Look, I'll default to that. I'm the bro there. All right. I'm the bro gun guy. I'm bro woke, whatever you want to call it. But if I can say something that makes you think about it and breaks down whatever, it makes you say, I may have had a bias error. Now, the more I think about it, then I'm going to do it. And that's why it's important for us to be there. Sorry, I got long winded. I know we had 10 minutes, but that's the magic wand. We keep showing up. We keep challenging in a respectful way, because we'll win over that crowd. There are a lot of anti-gun people in that crowd. There are more people that aren't, that are gun neutral. I guarantee it. And the more that we show up and we're respectful and we challenge, because that's what research is about. They challenge each other. I watch them challenge each other, right? Then we're going to change this shift. We're going to work together on stuff that makes sense, instead of just letting people put numbers out there and attack things that don't,
Yeah. Yeah. If I could wave my magic wand, I would just want some agreed upon definition for what youth is in regards to firearm violence or negative outcomes from firearm, because that was part of the slide issue. Is there were people being like, use this statistic, and it was like ages 5 to 44, and like, well, Kids to Kings doesn't really work with that older population. And then we got a reply from someone saying basically, well, researchers dice up their demographic and population because there's many pros and cons for setting the line somewhere. No, that's not the point. It shouldn't be, well, there's a pro if I kind of communicate my research this way and findings this way. It should be no. The agreed upon population is 1 to 18, 1 to 17, 1 to 19, wherever it is. But that way it's a static thing for past research and future research to be compared on the same playing field, not just moving the variables based on what the findings are.
Yeah, it really, I couldn't say it strong enough, right? I kept saying, when you play with these numbers and you leave out stuff that's obvious, you can get people killed that way. Like, now I sound like the person who says systemic racism is what the reason why people kill each other. But I do mean that, because here's the thing: if you're not addressing the issue directly, whatever that is in that pocket, right? That's doing that group a disservice. Everybody that's listening to the show right now and all those researchers, I'm going to give everybody the benefit of the doubt that, we're all smart enough to dive into those statements, but a lot of people won't dive into those statements. So when someone says 1 to 19, number one killer in the youth, I think people's mind defaults to Uvalde kids and Parkland kids, and that's it. Right. So then they get angry and they get upset, and they never really say, like, okay, let's find out who in there. They just take that and they run with it. And that's dangerous. We need to be able to address each problem with its own specific solution. Now, everyone's going to disagree on if that solution is going to be effective or not, but that's why we have researchers, right? So let's get some of that research going and put it towards some of the solutions that the gun industry is putting forward for the first time ever. You know what I mean? And there was some stuff that I actually thought was really interesting. Like, I was in one breakout session. We're going to go over, buddy. Sorry. I was in one breakout session, and I can't remember the exact age range. I'll have to look back through my notes because I came prepared for this podcast. But it was something like ages 1 or 11 to like 15 or something. African Americans have now jumped over white kids who kill themselves. Caucasians, right? That's a statistic that's really telling to me. I can use that. Like, I know people would say, well, isn't that cherry picking? I'm like, well, but if that's the truth in that range, now I'm like kids to kings. Oh my God. Everything that Devin Perkins wanted to do, where he wanted to really put the mental health aspect into the firearms training with these kids, these young Black males, that statistic right there just played into why he is so important. Right? So, like, that's the stuff that there was a lot of good stuff. I do not want this to be the bitching hour of this thing. It's better to talk about the bitch stuff, because the fun stuff, that's not fun when everyone loves you. It's boring. Like, everyone giving me high fives, right? We got to talk about the stuff that, that's the interesting stuff, because this is how we make it better. Or this is how we figure out how to do it, is when we kind of talk about where we saw some holes or flaws. But I don't want anyone to think like it was all bad. There was a lot of good information there, a lot of good information that gun owners could use. As long as we abandon our fear of data and not think of it as just something that can be used against us, but think of it as something that we can take now and present solutions and use their data to show the world why we know what we're doing, right? It's different now. We're in a totally different time period. We did that. We sat on the sideline for a long time, right? We were caught up in that fight. It's over. It's over now. Like, I'm walking through that thing going, who's going to make me right in here? And let me show you how you did it. And that's the attitude I had. So, on that note.
Only 5 minutes over. You're not that bad.
Only
Money's just typing in. He said, amen, brother. What questions does the gun community want answered? That's a whole nother podcast in itself.
Yeah. Yeah.
The impacts of voluntary temporary storage come to my mind. I know we're working with Gala True on that, but that would be incredible to show positive impacts of the things that she's doing in Louisiana and show that that's a viable alternative to ERPOs, to potentially get somebody temporary access or storage for their firearms voluntarily, and being able to research somebody being like, yeah, that was a huge impact on my life, I think would help expand those things. What else do you have, Mike?
Obviously, the one that I presented in the presentation is let's get some more research on maybe the unintentional consequences of some of the laws that we put forward, that we only focus on, the anecdotal positive stuff that they do. Like talking to a few researchers that were heavily involved in ERPOs, I was like, Are you guys doing any research to find out how many people who had the extreme risk protection order imposed on them actually agreed with it after the fact, right? Like, I want to see those numbers. I want to see numbers where people are like, if it wasn't for the ERPO, I was going to do something horrible. Because everybody that I've met that has had an ERPO on them has said that they didn't deserve it. Granted, my pool is not very large. There's very few people that I've met that actually had gone through an ERPO. But I would be interested to see, because some of these states, there's been 500, 700 people that it's been enacted on, and I want to see what they say. I want to see, I was going to take my own life if I didn't have my guns taken away from me by law enforcement. I was going to shoot up a school or do something horrific. I think that's fair research to find out what the victim, I don't want to say victim, or the person on the receiving end thinks,
Yeah.
not just the conclusion of the researcher.
Almost like redefining success of ERPOs of we have all our negative kind of feelings towards them, but all right now the signs of success are almost like ERPOs handed out and executed, not like the efficiency and effectiveness and need for them.
Yeah. Did I change anybody's mind? I think I gave people a lot to think about. I'm not sure if I changed their mind. I guess time will tell. I just came back yesterday. I got in last night. So time will tell. You know what
Yeah.
I mean?
And like we always talk on this, of changing the mind right then and there isn't the goal. It's just opening to different perspectives for those individuals to digest on their own kind of timeline. And yeah, then their mind slowly changes and gets open to new ideas versus you change their mind right then and there. And that doesn't happen. Just like you say, oh, here, I'll buy you a beer. At the end, we'll hug it out, but your mind doesn't need to be changed right then, here and there.
Yeah, and thank you, David, for that compliment. And likewise, like I said this to at my when I was speaking, and usually I speak at these events, and I don't see one friendly face. It was very nice to see David Yamani out there. It was very nice to see Bill Broussard. It was nice to see Pincus. It was nice to see some friendly faces in the crowd. But yeah, going back to the change someone's mind. I'm gonna tell them about our conversation earlier today, Kevin, because I did get in a nice healthy debate with somebody about the 1 to 19, the youth violence thing, and she wrote a beautiful email to me. She was flying to Texas for another conference, and she wrote a beautiful email to me that said, I've been thinking a lot about what you said. I've been obsessed with it since we had the conversation, and I'm on my way to Texas. I'm on the flight right now crafting this email. And she gave her reasons why she's standing firm on some things. But Kevin and I were discussing the email this morning as I was crafting my response. And Kevin was helping me with that because I need help sometimes. And it's like, what am I trying to convey? But, in the email, I made a point to say, Mary, when you read this, I want you to read it as if we're talking at that bar. I don't want you to read, because sometimes tone is lost in the text. So I was like, this is the same. I made it a point to say, read this as if we were talking at the bar, because we didn't get emotional. We didn't get angry. We were having a good back and forth. So it's like, that's the type of conversation we need to continue. And I hate having those responses in email, but clearly I got her thinking. You know what I mean? And and I think, I responded, and it'll be interesting to see how she responds to my responses. You know what I mean? Like I'm excited to see that. So this is the type of conversation that attending this conference is going to bring, to the forefront, which is the most important thing. Because a lot of these researchers, I see, they want to make it better. They want to be perfect. They want it to be right. They don't want to offend with their numbers, and they want it to just be what it is. I've really felt that.
Was your mind opened about anything that you hadn't been maybe considering before attending this?
Yeah, the sheer number of people that were open to it, I can now feel safe about, like, looking people in the face and saying not all researchers are trying to screw people over. So I think it just, I may not have had that bias like in the forefront, but probably in the back of my mind it existed. And Kenny and Rob might have a different opinion on that, but I didn't, I didn't feel like anyone was gunning for us. I mean, there were people there gunning for us, but I didn't feel like that was the overall theme. So it's kind of good to get the confirmation that, not everybody's there to, they're not always there to do something malicious to our industry or our community. And, so I think that opened my mind a little bit too. I really changed my mind on anything. Yeah. You're not really going to change my mind on any of these laws as being effective ways to stop negative outcomes of firearms because I'm just too deep into it. I can say that I could meet someone where they're at. And like I said, take, for example, a transfer law. We sit here and say time and space between someone and their firearm is the best way to prevent suicide. So who am I to say that somebody who went to a gun shop, bought a gun, went out in the range and took their own life, or bought that gun, went right home and shot themselves, couldn't have benefited from a waiting period? Like, I'm not going to deny that. But those are anecdotal stories that I don't think reflect the overall gun buying experience. So, I'm open to have those discussions, but I'm not changing my mind on it.
Yeah, I'll be interested to hear Kenny and Rob's perspective as you were given a somewhat already head start of respect and credential being a speaker on the panel, where Kenny and Rob were maybe after panel question warriors, but they weren't given a speaking spot from the organization. So did their experience change a little bit coming from that perspective and people not seeing them up on stage? I don't know.
And who knows? They're going to have to speak for themselves. I mean, we all had eye rolling moments, which everybody in the chat and who's listening right now, you would have had your eye rolling moments. There are the moments where we caught each other's face in the crowd and we'd have both like gone, oh boy, here it is again. But there I had eye rolling moments where researchers caught me rolling my eyes and then they were just curious. And then they were like, okay, that's fair. Yeah, I see what you're saying. You know what I mean? So it is what it is. We're never all going to agree. I told one researcher, I think it was Megan. I was either talking to Megan or Emmy. I was like, if you guys came to SHOT Show, you'd see how many of us disagree with each other on things, right? Like, you have people walking around SHOT Show that truly believe that you should be able to buy a machine gun in a vending machine, right? Like, and then you would have a bunch of people running around SHOT Show and saying, no, that's a little radical. But, so however you feel about that, to say that, we are not this monolithic group that all agrees on the same things. We have disagreements within. I mean, I made a joke, because somebody was saying how it's fun to watch Rob because like Rob is the guy that's up on every Q&A and she's like, sometimes I can't figure if he's trying to get kicked out or whatever. I'm like, you can say the same thing about Rob at a gun event. There's no difference between Rob at a gun event and Rob at a research event. He's going to ruffle feathers. He's going to challenge what you believe or what he thinks is wrong. He's going to do it. He does not believe in letting someone just say something and getting away with saying it, where I'm a little bit more like, it's a long game. And if people want to talk, then they'll talk to me about it. But, Rob is like, no, this needs to be addressed and thrown out on the table. Like, that's what I said. However you feel about Rob, thank your lucky stars he was there because he would have done the industry proud.
All right. Last question from G Web was any other national level gun owners' rights group besides NSFF represented at the event?
No, not that I was aware of. Maybe David, you saw somebody or somebody that I don't know. But to me, if you don't count the group from the Armory Project, and I'm not even sure everybody in the Armory Project, they're not like David, they're not like Kenny, they're not like Bill, you know what I mean? Like, it was just that small group, Pincus, all of us there. Very small, but maybe that's the perfect start, right? Because then you can get you're able to report back to people and saying, this isn't a buzzsaw, this isn't going to be unfair, like you should show up to this thing, it'd be really important. So it's like we tested the water and the water's fine. And, we keep an attendance there. We keep a presence there. It's checks and balances, Yeah, but no, to answer your question, G-Web's nothing. No, I didn't see anybody there. Rob is talking about making sure that Second Amendment Foundation has a presence there as Second Amendment Foundation next year. So,
all right, take us home.